So, I wanted to tell you about an experience I had about a month ago. I was having a conversation with my friend Margaret. We exchanged thoughts and ideas. And together we tore down the weak parts and we built upon the strong parts of these ideas we shared with each other. I particularly had in mind some ideas that I needed to have considered from a different point of view. Mostly because I wasn't sure if my ideas were strong, original, and good enough to be shared with other people. So I needed someone else's input in order to develop and improve my ideas. As I started to explain my thoughts, I realized the difficulty of the task I was faced with. Trying to explain an idea you haven't fully developed can turn into a frustrating attempt at trying to make yourself understood. It's a bit like knowing you have strong feelings for someone and wanting to tell that person what you feel, but you can't, because you don't exactly know what that strong feeling is. So what we do is, we use general terms and simple words to explain what we feel. I therefore try to explain my thoughts using different words, rephrasing. I made some examples. I made it visualize what I was trying to say. But the more I tried to explain my thoughts, the more complicated they became and the more confused I got until he finally stopped me. And he said, "If you're having so much difficulties in explaining your thoughts to one person, how are you going to convey your ideas to the bigger audience, to the world?" He was right. Even though I had an idea in mind, it was of no value as I could not make myself understood. Because as I could not make myself understood, I could not convey the ideas I had. Now, imagine if I, as a consequence of the difficulties I faced when trying to make myself understood, had just given up and let go of my thoughts and ideas. I would certainly not be standing on the stage right now. I would maybe not even go to the school I go to. I would not be the person I am today. Imagine if every time we face difficulties in making ourselves understood, we would just let go of our opinions, our beliefs, and our ideas. We would never push ourselves to go beyond those already existent ideas we too comfortably understand and too often rely on. We would be left with nothing but a bunch of overused ideas. So you see, here lies the importance of being able to making yourself understood. It is about being able to share the ideas you have with others. And the interaction between the diverse ideas of different people is what gives birth to strong, original, and good ideas. It is the interaction between ideas that brings innovation and that brings development. It is this type of interaction that brings us forward. But understanding is key for this development to happen. For without understanding, we cannot grasp each other's ideas, and we cannot grasp other points of view. Without understanding, we cannot interact, and we cannot advance. And without doubt, at a certain point in a conversation or in a discussion, you will not be understood, at least not in the way you intend it to be. You will always face people with different points of view. It's inevitable because as others have not made the same experiences as you have, they do not relate to situations in the same way you do. For example, if you were late for an interview once, and because of that, you lost the opportunity of getting the position you were applying for. From the consequences you suffered from these particular experiences, you decide that it is important to be on time, and this becomes your opinion. Then another person, you for example, you were also late for an interview once, but you still got the position. You didn't suffer any consequences from your experience of being late. So you become of the opinion that it is okay to be late. When both of you then know that you should be in this room at 4 o'clock, you will have different opinions regarding the importance of being on time. Because as you have not made the same experiences, you do not relate to situations in the same way. Similarly, the opinions, beliefs, and ideas that we draw from our experiences will not be valid under all circumstances. It will not always be the case that you can, without consequences, be late for appointments. And it will not always be the case that you will suffer consequences from being late. But even if what we learn from our experiences does not apply to every situation and to every person, even if others do not relate to situations in the same way you do, that does not mean that you can never make people see the reasons behind your opinions. So, coming back to the conversation I was having, as I was acknowledging my problem of not being able to make myself understood, I realized what I had to do in order to make my friend understand. I needed to convey my message in a manner that made it easy for him to relate. You see, by making others relate to your experiences, the better they will understand your point of view. How to do that, though, is not that easy. Telling about your experience in a way that people can relate to them is definitely the most difficult part of making yourself understood. Because your task then becomes to extract the one principle that most effectively states what you believe to be the case. It's a bit like trying to explain the plot of a movie you've just seen to a friend. You choose to focus on the parts of the movie you believe most accurately represents the plot of the movie. And just like we draw the message from a movie, we draw the messages from our experiences. And just like a movie summary tells us how things are in the movie, the messages we draw from our experiences tell us, more or less, how things are in general. Therefore, the most important and difficult part of making yourself understood is knowing what message to draw from your experiences. What principle it is that most effectively summarizes your experiences. Now, these principles we draw from our experience tell us more or less how things are, how to act, and especially what to do in whatever situation we find ourselves in. Our principles become basic rules we live by. In this very room, for instance, your principles are telling you to not interrupt the speakers on stage. And as follows, to not interrupt the speakers on stage becomes a basic, unwritten rule we live by. Now, the most powerful rules are the ones that apply to the most people and under the most circumstances. So a more powerful rule than to not interrupt the speakers on stage would be to not interrupt people at all. You see the difference? The latter rule is more powerful because it is not restricted to this room only. The latter rule is more general and can therefore apply to more people and under more circumstances. So what it comes down to is that if you want to draw the rule from experience that applies to the most people, to the most situations and under the most circumstances, you need to generalize. Because the more general the rule, the more people it applies to, and the more people are able to relate. And the more people are able to relate to your experiences, the better they will understand you. And generalizing is something we all do. That was also a generalization. We do tend to make statements that relate to many people, things, and conditions based on limited facts. These limited facts are our subjective experiences. And from our personal experiences, we form our ideas of how things are. And we make our statements, which we, needless to say, believe are true. And generalizing our experiences makes it easier for us to relate them to whatever situation we find ourselves in. Just think about how you make your decisions. You firstly attempt to predict the outcome of your decision before you actually make it and act accordingly. And how are we able to predict the outcome of our decisions? We do it by looking back at whatever past experiences we've made that somehow relates to the current situation we find ourselves in. So what we do when we make our decision is we apply the rules we drew from our previous experiences. So it is the rules we draw from our experiences that tell us how to act and what to say in whatever situation we find ourselves in. And we generalize these rules out of necessity. We need the simplicity that comes with generalizations so that we know how to make decisions and how to act. We might not be conscious of it, but generalization is what enables us to comprehend the world around us. For the alternative would be to think in terms of every possible detail. And as I experienced from my conversation I had with my friend, the complexity of thoughts going through my mind was too chaotic for me to be able to make myself understood. And even though we all know that, again, a generalization, that to every rule there are exceptions, we choose to not focus on the exceptions, and there's a reason why. Because if we only focus on the exceptions, we are not able to make any statements about how things are in the world. We always look at the general rule before we look at the exceptions. We look at the rules that apply to all citizens of the country before we look at the rules that only applies to certain age groups. We look at the general grammar rules that applies before we look at the exceptions. And we look at the economies that follow the theory before we look at the exceptions. You see, what generalization gives us is a foundation upon which understanding for the exceptions can be built. And it needs to be in this order for us to be able to comprehend the complexity of this world. So in order for you to be able to make yourself understood, you need to firstly generalize so that you can draw the general rule from your experiences that most effectively applies to the most people. Then, after having made your generalization, the basis upon which understanding for the exceptions can be built, then you can consider the exceptions. And then you can most effectively make yourself understood. Because from the general statement, people relate, and then they will be better equipped at understanding your exceptional view. But we need to be aware that the rules we draw from our experiences are generalizations. And this awareness is crucial so that the rules we live by do not restrict us and prevent us from developing. Because as time has shown, rules change as we discover more and as we become aware of the exceptions. And rules improve as we grow and as we develop our ideas. But only if we remain receptive towards other points of view. And only as long as we are able to make ourselves understood. And nonetheless, as long as we seek to understand. Thank you.